So that's going to get us into cybernetics and the science of communication and control systems. Most people, when they hear the word cybernetics, they usually think of cyborg, they usually think of a Terminator, but a much easier example of cybernetics and thinking about control systems and feedback loops, which a feedback loop, just choose action, you execute the action, go into, or you take in the actual reaction, you analyze the reaction, and then you choose another action. A much better example compared to the Terminator is just an AC unit, a thermometer. This is an old one, so this is an old Honeywell, and I think it's easier to understand versus our kind of new Nest thermometers, smart thermometers, and thermostats. And what's interesting about this, I mean, it's a contained system. You can think about your house, you adjust the temperature, you might open a window, the temperature goes down a little bit, you get these reactions in this small contained system, you turn on the AC, you turn off the AC, but there is this kind of feedback loop that's very easy to understand when you're thinking about a thermostat and this regulator unit where as the temperature adjusts above or below the target temperature that you've set, the AC will turn on or will turn off until the temperature kind of gets back close to what we targeted and set. But this idea of a loop is really important. And this idea of cybernetics and thinking of in terms of systems and the ability to even detect the temperature, right? So if your thermostat didn't have a way or the temperature was varying too fast, then it would just be going crazy. So thinking about these systems and control systems and thinking about keeping them simple or contained or predictable is important. Now, when we get into computer systems, they obviously can think through much more complicated feedback loops than humans can. But it is important as we're designing and thinking about even those systems, and especially if we want to remain in control or we want to have some semblance of influence over those systems, then we have to think about keeping those things simple and kind of well-defined. So how does this relate to computing, though? And how does this relate, especially to Bitcoin? Well, I'm going to get into that. And the first stage of kind of opening or thinking about how this relates to Bitcoin is we've used this slide a lot. Beyond the price hike as a computing revolution, we think that Bitcoin actually represents something very big in terms of transition of the overall computing model. So we're shifting from this more fragile hierarchy of centralized services with Facebook and with Google into something that's much more resilient. And it's easy to think about whenever you just look at the decentralization or you look at the spread of the network, the participants in the network, but the nuance is really important here too. But the important point is, again, that Bitcoin is not just a financial revolution, it's actually a computing revolution. So we've been recently talking about kind of how we can think of the 4 waves of computing. And I'm going to run through this pretty quick because I want to take this nugget, and for those of you that haven't seen our talk on 4 waves of computing, you can double back to that, and I go into a little bit more detail here. But there are, we consider these to be 4 waves. First one being mainframe computing and local applications. Second one being personal computing and local applications. The third one being more mainframe computing, and this is the one with Facebook and Google, but network applications. And then the fourth one, which we feel like we're on the edge of now, as more personal computing, but network applications. So what does that look like? Mainframe computing, local apps. We have IBM servers here, and a big IBM 360 setup. We have personal computing and local apps. What does that look like? Well, looks like the Apple II, right? Or even a LAN party. And the computers are connected, but they're in a room together in this situation. So, and video games, you've seen new applications emerge kind of at each layer or at each wave. And video games were a huge one that emerged. And then you have LAN parties, and you can start to see the edges of the shift to the third one, which is the more mainframe computing network apps, where we see the economics here and the security model pushed all the data into these massive centralized data centers. This is a Facebook data center here. And then the experience we have with this computing model is actually mostly through our phones. These are thin clients. Even most of your laptops, I would bet right now, you're all talking with people, chatting with people, doing other interactions, talking with the cloud, but you're not talking directly to another computer. You're always routing through some centralized data center, and we'll get to why that's really important on the security side and sovereignty side in a sec. So that brings us to what we consider to be the fourth wave, which is personal computing, network applications. And I will say that amongst these, this is a slightly oversimplified model overall. In reality, we've had all of these have kind of existed in one shape or form throughout the different waves of the internet. They've just grown or changed based on the technologies that were available, and some have become more dominant than others. And I think, again, we're exiting this wave of more mainframe, kind of centralized computing with network applications is something that will become more personal. And what this looks like, the tools of trade with this are, you have a miner over here on the far side. We have a hardware wallet, a Trezor in the middle to manage keys. You have a Casa node there that is running a full node of Bitcoin and of Lightning. And in practice, how this is used, so this is a meme, which is awesome, because I think, so Crypto Scam Hub, shout out to Crypto Scam Hub, who made this. I think this world starts to enable some new interactions. Nobody knows who Hodlnaut is, and he started this entire thing. And the fact that he can participate in this network without totally revealing himself is an indicator, right? There's something new here. So this is about the lightning torch and the pass off between Jack and Startmus here. And then I love this slide too with stop and decrypt. Bitcoin is an impenetrable fortress of validation. But there's something going on here. Again, I don't want to get into the details here, but there's something going on here in terms of this model that is different. And again, I have another talk where I go into a lot more depth here on this specific model. But I want to combine this and the chunks of this with what we were just talking about around cybernetics, and to answer this question of how did we lose control. And again, to answer that question, we're going to be talking about feedback loops and the different computing waves that we just analyzed there. And so let's look at mainframe computing and local apps first. The interaction with mainframe computing in the early days is incredibly simple, right? So the two characters in our earlier image there with the IBM 360, they interact directly with the machine. They can do it at the same time, but at least for each of them, it's somewhat predictable, like the cycles that are happening in terms of their direct interaction, the feedback that they're getting. The system is somewhat limited now. On IBM may have made the machine, they can come in and upgrade the machine, but their ability to observe what is actually happening in the system is much cleaner than kind of what we've seen today, and it's much more simplified. So around personal computing and local apps, we took the same ideas there with the mainframe computing side, but we just brought them into the home. We brought them into more environments. So again, playing video games, this guy, I mean, his name's like Roger or something. He looks like a Roger, right? Like he's probably playing Quake. He's probably doing, word processing something, and he's interacting directly with the machine. He may be updating. He may be even using a cracked version of Windows. Who knows? But his level of control, he may have even built this machine. But we've moved away from that level of interaction, control, and understanding of the local machines, local software for most people. Now, again, some people are still maintaining or running some machines like this, but for most people, they just take what they get and they use their phone or they use their computer, and they're not thinking in terms of, again, the kind of level of control they have. So that brings us to mainframe computing and network apps. And again, a reminder of kind of how we interact with these, usually through our phones, sometimes through a laptop, but always interfacing with the broader cloud behind the screens. And so what you think this looks like is something like this, because you're just interacting directly with your phone, and your phone responds to you, it sends you an alarm or an alert, or you get a notification, something. But it actually looks like something more like this, right? With Facebook behind the scenes running their centralized data servers. But I think to the picture, we really need to dig into kind of what's happened here, because it did start out like this. It started out as a literal server in Zuckerberg's, in the dorms, in Harvard, and then shifted to the house where they were living, and then they pushed it out into data centers, and it started to look more and more like this, and then starts looking more like this, and eventually it gets all the way to where we are today, which is something like this. And all of those are sub-data companies that are working somewhere in the kind of advertising complex. And I used to work in ad tech, so I saw this inside of Google, kind of what this world looks like. And it's insane. It's insane how many companies are mining and looking at our data, massaging our data, somehow feeding back into the system, into these control loops, and eventually into the incentives that build notifications that come into your phone. If you want to know why you're addicted to your phone and why you have these problems, again, around interaction with your computers and your phones, it's driven by this. It's driven by all of these players behind the scenes that every single day, every single interaction you make with your phone or with your computer, they're getting data on it. They want more data. They want you interacting more. And the system as a whole, again, just thinking in terms of feedback loops, is enormous. And your ability to influence that system is also tiny. It's absolutely tiny. Because you have, and I'll actually touch on this in a minute, what happens whenever you try to step away. The other thing that's also happening is that now it's really easy for outside powers, so we have Obama and Trump and a shirtless Putin here. It's easy for outside powers to inject themselves into that loop. Now the tools are already built for the monitoring, for serving ads, and it was really easy for the powers that be to kind of co-opt that. And if you do try to opt out of it, you try to throw up an ad blocker, a lot of sites will just block you. You try to just turn off your phone, you try to stay totally local. Again, you can't use most of the apps that you have there without having some connection to the cloud. And there is this edge of a movement to get beyond this, but this is still the state of things for a majority of applications. So that brings us to personal computing and network apps. And I think that we're on, it's still very hard to see what this is going to look like at an extremely large scale, but we're already starting to see benefits, and we're already starting to see a lot more control locally in terms of how this is structured. And so for Jack, capturing the torch, playing with Casa Node, he has direct control over that. Once we ship that device out, there are no analytics software in that. It is calling home occasionally for updates, but he can refuse any of the updates, and the device will still work. Whenever he sets up a connection, a direct open channel with another node that is connecting directly to that other peer, it is something very different from the world that we are kind of now exiting in terms of personal computing, and in terms of personal control, and in terms of personal sovereignty. We now have an incentive, and we are building this company in a way where we now have an incentive to support our customer sovereignty, and the only way that they're going to come back to us to pay more and to continue their service with us is if they're fully satisfied. Also, the only way that we're going to continue product development in this sphere, in this kind of cycle setup, is if they are coming back to us to get better and better sovereignty solutions. The only way we learn about if they have a problem is actually if they actually call us directly. So we've ripped out all of our analytics, we've ripped out even a lot of crash reporting. We rely directly on customers to actually submit data to us when they have problems, or if they have suggestions for features, because our approach or our analysis is that a lot of those tools that in the past have been just about, okay, we'll just, we're just going to take, I think it's all the way to the point now that where there are some companies taking full screen grabs, that in the past, I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that people were not thinking that it would get used for kind of full-on spying, but that's how it's being used now. So we are now in this kind of new world to where I think your ability to opt out of a specific system, your ability to use this locally, use your systems locally, will improve and increase. And so with that, kind of what is data and computing sovereignty, I want to kind of approach or give a new approach or a new definition. and that as control over your data and computing feedback loops.